Hello, everyone, and welcome to FCI Live 2025. This is our second week of the two-week series. Thank you so much for being here with us. And this is a topic that has been much requested. This is types of market studies with Patrick Shabram. And we're going to get into that session in just a moment. First, we just want to thank our FCI Live champion sponsors, National Coop Grocers, Dot Co-op, and Colluminate for making this series possible. We deeply, deeply appreciate it. This topic today is one that actually I ended up mentioning in my session on tools of feasibility. I think I mentioned a couple other sessions that other speakers have promoted this session because market studies are such a key intrinsic part of figuring out how you're going to move forward with your food co-op, that what kind of business it's going to be, what size it's going to be, its location. It's such a key piece of finding feasibility for your future co-op so you have a successful, sustainable, fundable co-op. So this piece is really key. And while we have, those who don't know, we have an action guide, Food Co-op Initiative, on what you do with the market study once you have it, how you utilize it, what it influences. We don't have something talking about getting the market study and that there are two different kinds. And Patrick actually brought to us, people are coming to me and saying, they're looking they're using these words but they're looking for this and it's two different kinds of studies and I'm like you're absolutely correct. So we are really grateful that he's been willing to come forward and cover this topic for us today and really clarify what kind of market studies there are, what they do for you, and when you might want them as startup food co-ops. So I'm going to turn it over to Patrick. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So, and I recognize some names, I recognize some faces. I've actually met a few of you in person and a few of you on Zoom calls. And so, please do if I bring up any terms that are unfamiliar, I shouldn't make any assumptions. So, please don't feel at all shy about just asking what I meant when I talk a little bit about this. So let me share my screen here real quickly. Okay. So yes, this as JQ mentioned, we're going to be talking primarily about two different types of, I don't want to say market studies because the market study terminology can get a little bit confusing at times. So we're going to be talking about preliminary market assessments versus market feasibility studies. And that's the distinction that we make between these two different types of studies and what you should expect from each one and when it's appropriate to request each type of study. First, I just want to give you a little bit of information about me. I am a location research consultant. So I have a classically trained in geography. I've been conducting geographic research since 1997 and right out of graduate school, actually, started working with location analysis in 1999. Okay. I first started working with food co-ops in 2016. So some of you may know the name Debbie Swasuna. We worked together in 1990 for a couple of years back in that first job that I had as a location analyst. And over time, she asked me to come help her with some of her studies. And more recently, I had been sort of working with her specifically on startup co-ops. G2G Analytics is now its own entity, and my primary focus is on startup co-ops. However, I do work with existing co-ops and very community-minded independent grocers as part of my work. I am a Colluminate consultant. I mentioned that on the first slide. So if you've seen my name associated with Colluminate, G2G Analytics is a consultant with Colluminate as well. So understanding your market. I can't emphasize how important it is to understand your market. So why do you even need a market analysis? Well, you need to make informed decisions. So this is going to help you make informed decisions about your co-op, what you're going to do when you open the co-op, how much you should expect in sales from your co-op, where you should put your co-op. And really, it helps you prevent making devastating mistakes. If you open a co-op and you regret the place that you actually put the co-op, or the site that you actually chose, it's really expensive to fix that. So understanding your market can really help you prevent you from making mistakes that you're going to regret in the long-term success of your co-op. If you need a pro forma, which most of you eventually will do, you're going to need some sort of market analysis. If you want to obtain financing, most banks do require that you have some type of market study, that you've done your homework on your market before you will actually get that financing. And then in some cases, if it's a large grant proposal, they may also want to see that you've done your homework on your market. Okay. As I mentioned before, there are two types of studies specific to startup co-ops. We do other types of studies with co-ops that have already opened, but right now I'm focusing primarily on you as startup co-ops. The two types of studies that we do: a preliminary market assessment and a market feasibility study. I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between the two, the methodology behind the two, so you have a better understanding of what is appropriate for you and when you should be requesting each of these different types of market studies. So let's start off with a preliminary market assessment, which it's a lot of syllables there. So PMA is going to be kind of used a little bit throughout this presentation. So we do what we call a preliminary market assessment. I'm not going to say that terminology is universal, but that's how we sort of make this distinction between that initial proof of concept for your market versus a full market study. And what we do when we do a preliminary market assessment is we'll basically provide a preliminary defined trade area, a ballpark sales range. And when I say a ballpark sales range, it could be something along the lines of 3 to 5 million, okay, within that, so that you get some sense of what kind of store that you would be looking at, whether or not you're looking at a smaller store or a larger store. And then we'll also give some initial guidance. That initial guidance would be on where you might consider locating your store within your market, okay? How big of store that you should have, and a product mix. And by product mix, I mean, are we talking about a natural and organic food store? Are we talking about a conventional food store? Right? Are we talking about a hybrid where you're looking at a combination of conventional foods at lower price points and organic and natural foods to serve a demand within your market? So this is, again, all preliminary. This is all sort of some initial idea of where you might want to actually go with this particular food co-op as you start to develop your plan for moving forward. I do want to really stress that a preliminary market assessment does not replace a full market study. Okay, eventually you will need a full market study. The preliminary market assessment, it's significantly cheaper, if I could use that term, than a full market study. And I know that there is occasionally folks who might see this as an opportunity to sort of get by without having to sort of pay for a full market study. This will not replace it. It will not typically be acceptable by lenders. It will not really give you the kind of pro forma that you actually need. This is a very early preliminary assessment of your particular market. Okay. What is our methodology within the preliminary market? I say market study. See, that was a wrong assessment is the terminology I'm supposed to use. Okay, we take a look at your entire market. Okay, So we don't look at it census tract by census tract, but what we're going to do is, let's say you want to open a conventional food co-op in a suburban setting, and uh, in a maybe a smaller city. Yeah. What we would do is we would basically look at other co-ops within our database that sort of fit that same criteria, that have the same sort of demographic characteristics. So we're going to define a trade area. We're going to look at the demographics of that particular trade area, and then we're going to match it up with other co-ops within our database. And we have over 100 co-ops where we know the trade area and we know the annual sales. And so we're going to match the proposed stores area to similar areas based on the geography, demographic characteristics, and the competitive environment. Okay. And that should give us an overall dollar range that you would likely to be to achieve from that particular market. And then we're going to apply maturity rate. So when your store opens, it is not going to achieve its full sales potential. We are looking at stores that are already open. We're looking at stores that have already maybe reached their mature sales level. And we can't compare your store to those stores in the overall first year sales. So what we will do is we will anticipate the maturity rate based upon the type of store that you're opening and the type of market that you're opening within. Yeah. Then we'll basically use these sales numbers and the demographic characteristics that we see within the market to recommend an appropriate product mix. Okay. So if it's an underserved area with low income, you may be looking at more conventional foods at lower price points, okay, to serve a population that is underserved. If it's a more affluent area, or if there's already a lot of conventional food stores in a market, you may be looking at sort of a product mix that has more organic and natural foods that are maybe not available at some of your conventional food markets in the area. So we will use that, the information that we have to basically come up with an appropriate product mix. We're going to look at the routes. We're going to look at where the population is concentrated. And that's going to help us sort of suggest certain locations that you might consider for it. And then we'll finish that with a 3 to 5 page letter outlining the results of the assessment and include a map of the trade area for you. So that's what is included with a preliminary market assessment. I do want to just emphasize that we're going to match the proposed store's trade area to similar trade areas based on geography, demographic characteristics, and competitive environments. Many of you have probably already been talking with people with co-ops that are open, right? And you maybe already have a sense of the sales numbers at other co-ops, and that is great. You absolutely should be talking to other people. There should be collaborations that are taking place. That's wonderful that you're doing that. The one caution that I would provide you is quite commonly we see where somebody is trying to basically compare apples to oranges, right? Maybe you are talking to people in a much more urban setting and you're in a more rural setting. Maybe your store doesn't have the same kind of seasonality that another market may have. Maybe you're talking to a store that's located right off of a large regional freeway and it gets a large number of sales beyond its trade area. So the important key here is that we've got a large number of co-ops that we've studied. And so we can work through that list to really come up with a good match when we're sort of developing your preliminary market assessment. Before I move on, were there any questions?
No questions in the chat as of yet. People are welcome to throw them in there, but I thought of like 5, but you covered this so well. I want to see you cover the other half before I start throwing questions at you. But guys,
Okay.
feel free to put questions in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit now about market feasibility studies. Okay. This is essentially a full market study. This is probably what most people are thinking of when they think of a market study. And your co-op will eventually need one of these. And you'll eventually need one prior to the opening of your store, but probably well before the opening of the store, maybe even before you start looking at specific sites. So these will include a defined trade area. So we're going to give a much better assessment of what would be your trade area. A sales forecast, and we're not giving you a sales range, we're actually giving you a dollar sales value. And that is based on a census tract by census tract assessment. So we're basically looking at all of the different census tracts within your market and essentially forecasting the sales out of each one of those census tracts. We're going to do a thorough review of the competitive environment. That includes visiting all the different competitors within your market. If you have a site that's being considered, we will do an assessment of the site and facility, and that will figure into our analysis. We will look at the location characteristics. So whether or not you have a site, if you're interested in a particular area, we can take a look at what that area entails, that specific location. And then our report is going to be much more detailed with the market feasibility study. So we're going to basically provide you with some major findings and recommendations. You will get a sales forecast that will cover the first 4 years of the store being open. We will provide information on the trade area characteristics, the competitive environment, and we'll lay out the methodology that we used in actually coming up with your sales figures for the proposed store. So with our methodology for this, it basically all starts with gathering some basic information about the intentions of your store. So what do you think would be the initial size that you're planning for the store? Or maybe you already have a site in mind and you want, and that site has a particular size that you're looking at. Maybe you've already got an idea of what kind of product mix you would like to have for the store. You already know what your competitors are. Where do people shop now? I mean, the co-op is not in the market, so where are people going now for the types of products that you're planning to offer? And then we would basically, again, define a preliminary trade area, although we'll refine that with our field work, right? Because after we've gathered that information, we will basically go into the field. And while we're in the field, we're basically going to evaluate the market area, and that's going to help us further refine the trade area. We'll define and observe patterns of access. What are the roads like? We do a lot of driving around the different markets that we assess. We will evaluate the facility and site and the location characteristics of any proposed sites. So we'll visit any proposed sites that you have and take a look at the characteristics. You don't need to have a site in mind to get a market study. A lot of people do not, and we'll provide you with information on what you might want to consider when it comes to looking for a site. We will identify and evaluate all the relevant competitors, and then we will evaluate the level of retail synergy that exists within that particular area. So that's what we do while we're in the field. Then we return to our office and use all of those data to evaluate or to essentially develop a sales forecast. Okay. Now, G2G Analytics uses what's known as an analog methodology for developing a sales forecast. And so an analog methodology is basically we're looking for analogous situations within the different segments within your market. So we've studied the sales penetration, the sales level of over 100 co-ops, and we've developed a database of trade area census tracts and how much in sales those census tracts produce at these different co-ops that we've actually studied. Okay. So we will pull the demographic data from each of the census tracts that are within your trade area. And then what we do is we will match the census tracts within your trade area with census tracts that are within our database, the stores. And again, we are looking for stores that are about the same size as your proposed store. We're looking for stores that are in a similar type of market. So if you're in a rural market, we'll be looking for stores that are in rural areas. We're looking for census tracts with similar demographics, similar ethnic makeups, similar competitive environments. So when we essentially pull all of this information and look at each census tract, we can come up with an estimated sales per capita within each census tract. And when we come up with that estimated sales per capita, we'll times that by the population, and that would be the amount of sales that would be anticipated for a fully mature store in that particular census tract. Okay. Then what we will do is we will basically determine the amount of sales that would come from beyond the trade area. So if you are in an urban area, or in a rural area, I should say, and you already have a really large trade area, you might not see a lot of sales come from beyond the trade area. If you are in a touristy area, you may see quite a bit. Or if you're located right along a very, a major intersection at a popular freeway, you might see a lot of sales coming from beyond your trade area. So that will be part of our calculation. That doesn't mean that your store is going to achieve the sales that we've just come up with. Again, we have to apply the maturity rates. Right? Those maturity rates can be anywhere from 60 to 75%, again, depending upon the type of store you're looking at. And when I say that, I mean the first year sales would be reduced by 60% or to 70%, depending again on the overall circumstances behind your particular store. The other thing to keep in mind is when we're looking at sales, we're looking back, right? So we're looking, so we're in 2025. We are just in the process of updating all of our data to 2024 sales. So when we're forecasting your store, we're looking at the potential sales as if it was 2024. Okay? Your store might not open until 2027. And so what we need to do is we need to calculate in what might be sales growth. And that sales growth may be in part dictated by what happens with the overall market, the overall industry, or what happens in terms of population growth within your particular market. Okay? This is a lot of work. This model requires constant updates to our database. So we are constantly collecting data. When your store opens, we may at some point want to study your store as part of this analysis, because we are basically constantly studying marketing conditions, sales growth, competitive influences. We've developed a database. The analog methodology works when you have a database specific to a particular industry or a particular type of store. And so what we are doing is we are essentially constantly updating our model, constantly updating our databases, and working with changes that are occurring within our different stores, within different demographic characteristics, within different sales in general, within we've noticed changes in, say, how different competitors may affect the overall sales growth. So it's a constantly ongoing refinement of our model that we work with as part of this methodology. I just wanted to pull up a little bit here to kind of show you a little bit more of what I'm talking about here. I live in Loveland, Colorado, so I went ahead and just pulled up the census tracts for Loveland, Colorado, just to kind of give you a better idea of the difference between the two. Can you see my mouse? Okay, great. All right, so Loveland, this is sort of the traditional part of Loveland. There has been a lot of population growth in the north, some population growth in the south, whole bunch of population growth out here in the eastern side. And I know that these folks out here are just really anxious for some sort of supermarket to open up out here. But I wanted to show you sort of the difference between how we would maybe go about looking at a preliminary market assessment versus a um, uh, a, a market feasibility study. So when we look at Loveland here, we're going to focus, let's say we're going to open a store maybe right around here in the Census Tract 1901. Okay. The trade area would really be this part of Loveland over, on here. We wouldn't really be anticipating that you get a lot of sales on the other side of I-25 here. So we would, if we were doing a preliminary market assessment, we would basically be looking at the demographic characteristics over here. We would be looking at the competitive environment. We probably wouldn't recommend a conventional food store here. We'd probably recommend a more natural food store, primarily because you've already got a number of different conventional competitors in this particular market. But we would come up with an estimated um, based sales range based upon our assessment of this particular area over in here. Okay. Now, when it comes time to do the full market study, the market feasibility study, we start looking at this census tract by census tract. And not by zip code, right? Census tract. This part of Loveland has 2 zip codes. It wouldn't be enough to really give you a more refined search. So we, as an example, let's say that the demographic characteristics in 1808 match the demographic characteristics in, say, 1711. Okay. In terms of incomes, we have actually about 10 variables. We've done calculations on the areas that we've studied, and there are basically about 10 variables that we see correlate with food sales at a food co-op. So if we were to basically look at the distance between these two, okay, this 1808 is a little bit closer. It doesn't have, it has some conventional competitors. And so we would basically look through our database to try and find similar census tracts that match those demographics that you find in 1808 and the competitive environment that you would find. Okay. I'm not even sure that I would include 1711 in your trade area because of this, but even if we have similar demographics, the competitive nature of this particular census tract is much greater. You basically have to drive past 2 natural food stores. And remember that we'll probably be recommending a natural food store here. So you basically have to drive past a Sprouts or a Natural Grocers. There's a Sam's Club there as well. Basically what you would be looking at is you'd be looking at a much stronger environment. So we wouldn't look just at the demographic characteristics. In this particular instance, we would say we want to find a census tract that has a similar competitive environment within that. And that's just one example. We're also looking at things like if you open a store and the parking is not adequate, we want to compare it to census tracts with stores that the parking is not adequate, right? Especially if you're, say, in a rural area, and most people are going to, or a suburban area, and most people are going to be arriving at your store in a vehicle. But this just gives you a sense of how much more detailed and focused our studies can be. I mentioned field work. Let's take a look at 1812. It's a much larger census tract because it's a more rural area. And 1812, if we were to take a look at the center of the census tract to our proposed store in 1901, it might show the store as being, some distance away from 1812. But when we're in the field, we can basically see that the population is really focused in these particular areas here, and out in here, it's a lot of natural area and not a lot of population. And so we would adjust that accordingly within our analysis to try and find, make sure that we're comparing an apples to apples comparison as we're moving through our different types of census tracts. Yeah. The other thing that really I should point out is When you get a market feasibility study, it will commonly be a couple of years or a few years before you actually open your store. So we do updates to our market studies. They're at a fraction of the cost of doing the full market study. So a lot of times people will start with a full market study and then do updates as they get closer to the opening of the store. And this might be the case that if your initial market study does not include a site, which is quite commonly the case. And maybe you are trying to get a better sense of what part of the market is going to produce better sales or how much you're going to get in sales in different parts. You have a neighborhood that has much better real estate costs and another neighborhood that seems to have maybe a better demand for a food co-op, which is the right place to go. You might want a market study for something like that. Um, we can update the market study to to sort of account for changes in sales growth within the industry, changes in population within your market. And usually field work is not required. If we can reasonably assess any site that you have in mind remotely, Google Earth is great for that. Um, uh, so, I've even had clients take photographs for me and help me do that sort of assessment. Then we would be able to update it without actually having to come into the field. If it cannot be reasonably assessed remotely, an example might be recently I had a store open that basically the parking was all going to be in a garage that the store was attached to. And I needed to know what that entrance was going to look like into the garage. Were you going to be able to move carts into it? This is something I couldn't really assess from Google Earth. This might be when we would need to do a very abbreviated field work, come to the market for maybe a day. If you've had rapid population growth or there's a new competitor that's opened up down the street, we need to visit that competitor. But the updates are, again, they're easy. I don't want to say easy to do. They're a lot less costly than doing the full market study. If you have a market study that's older than 6 years, though, and I'm going to throw in 6 years, JQ may have a difference of opinion on that, but
Yeah, a question already came about this earlier, so I was excited to see you threw down a number. I think it does depend on the community, and I'm glad you pointed out, like, yeah, and it depends on what's changed. If you've
yeah,
gotten three new
exactly.
competitors in the last 3 years, your market analysis person is going to need to come on site, right? I'm glad you brought that up. But it was one of the big questions, and it's getting likes, is how long would you say these market feasibility studies generally last once they're done? And that seems like it's a really flexible number to me. What do you think?
I think it is a flexible number. I Last year, I did what I called an abbreviated market study. I mean, I want to work with you on this. It was in a rural market. The market study was 7 years old. I was uncomfortable just doing an update, but I could tell that the competitive environment had changed a little bit, but not a
How
lot.
much?
And so what I ended up doing was just an abbreviated market study. But typically, if it's more than 6 years old, I kind of use that as a number that is sort of a guideline for me personally. It really depends upon a market by market time frame within that.
And I
And
want to just highlight because I know what happens. I know what our brains do as humans. Patrick did not just promise you that your market study will last 6 years no matter what.
yes,
And I get it because it's what our brains do, right? So I just want to make sure for those of us who don't have a lot of experience with market studies that you understand that. He's saying that's the outer edge.
yes,
So, and
yes.
so basically, if someone's like, hey, we did a full market study with you and we want to update, that's going to be a conversation, right, with you where you're asking about what's changed and so forth so you can decide what can be done.
Absolutely. And competitors are a big one, right? If you get changes in competitors, or if you've got a really fast growing population, and we need to know where that population is going to be. Or I will have to say too, if we did a market study on, if you're in a, say, let's say a medium-sized city, and you initially had a site that was on the east side of town, and now you have a site that's on the west side of town, that you're really going to want another market study. So it really depends upon the characteristics. I'm using 6 years as an outside guide, so that if you have a market study and it's 8 or 9 years old, I, really, I would not actually be able to update that particular one, because it's just too old at this point. We really do need to do a new market study. Um, Keep in mind, again, these are helping you make informed decisions. These are potentially preventing you from making extremely costly mistakes that you really might not be able to recover from. So um, it's important that you make the investment that you need to make. And we recognize the fact that you're just starting to, you're in startup mode. Um, Dollars count. We're not trying to oversell you by any stretch of the imagination. We just need you to be able to make informed decisions on your particular market.
And I do want to stress that. I think that's so insightful and true, Patrick. And it's like, I know it's really hard to start up. We don't have the money. And we're like, and now someone says, I need another study, and that's going to cost X thousand dollars. And absolutely, it is your job as a board. You're representing a co-op to question how you're spending your dollars and make sure it's valuable. Ask the questions, but and do ask the questions. Ask Patrick why. He would be happy. And any other, and I've never met a market study person who's worth their salt that wouldn't explain, here's why I can't just do a quickie update for you. Here's why I need to come on site and actually explain the factors to you. But absolutely, ask the question, what are the factors? Make sure, that you're not dealing with someone who's just trying to get money out of you. But in the vast majority of cases, if it's a market analysis company that's worked with startups a good deal, they're on your team and they're only suggesting it because they really feel it's necessary. But find out why. Occasionally, I know there's been a few conversations, it wasn't you, it was Debbie, where I bit sat in on conversations where startup was like, we want an update, but not the, and they baited it back and forth and the factors, and then Debbie's like, all right, I can do an abbreviated study now that we've really talked that through. So like it's not that people aren't willing to, like, sometimes you can bring things to the table, so go ahead and ask those questions. Consider a market analysis person part of your team and have the convo with them. And they should be able to provide you enough reasons why and information that you shouldn't feel like they should feel like they're a member of your team. You shouldn't feel defensive.
Thank you. Okay, so I think this might be the piece that a lot of you are really interested in. When is a preliminary market assessment the right call? And in a minute, I'll let you know when the market feasibility study is the right call. A preliminary market assessment is intended for groups very early in the process. Okay? You've only got a few members. You're unsure of the viability in this new market. Um, Kind of ask yourself the questions. Is it really worth all of this time and energy to try and open up the store if what we're envisioning isn't even realistic in this particular market? Okay. Um, it, if you want to recruit members, it would help to have an expert that's basically looked at this and said, yeah, if you open a store here, and I'm not going to recommend against or for you opening a store. My goal is to just give you the numbers so that you can make informed decisions, right? And so I could let you know what kind of range you're actually looking at, and you can decide. You can use that to essentially recruit members to your cause, to the movement of the development of a co-op within your particular market. I could also provide some initial guidance on the store size, the location, and the product mix. So that's really when you need a PMA, is early in the process when you're not really sure where to start with a location or store. You've only got a few members. You really want to start to move this process along. Okay. I do need to very much emphasize that a preliminary market assessment may change with a full market study. I tried to give you a sense of the difference between the level of detail that we go into. There have been times when we go into a market and we're like, you know what? There's going to be a lot of sales out of this particular home census tract that you're looking at, and it sort of changes the overall numbers. Or a competitor is much stronger than what we initially anticipated. So it is we're trying to give you a good range, but the market study may I don't want to say contradict, but may change what the overall outlook is based upon what was initially provided with the preliminary market assessment.
And I just
When
want
are
to
you ready for a market feasibility study? And again, eventually you're going to need a market feasibility study. Okay? And you should start considering this when you need a pro forma. Okay? The people you hire to do your pro forma will need to know what your sales potential are going to be for your particular market. And that requires the market feasibility study. If you're considering a specific site or a specific location, then a market feasibility study. I mean, at that point, you're not looking at a preliminary market assessment. You don't want me to assess the whole market. You want me to assess how that specific site or that specific location is going to work. You need to assess different parts of your market for the best area. And it seems recently that I've done several different proposals and recently a couple different studies where people have said, we're not sure if this should go in the north part of a market, the central part of a market, or the south part of a market. Where do you think it should go? And I've come in and done market studies where I've done essentially recommended locations within the different parts of the market and provided a sales forecast within that. And I'm not telling you you should go in the north or the south or the central. I'm basically saying if you go in the north, this is your sales potential. And if you go in the south, this is your sales potential. And from that, you can make informed decisions based upon real estate costs and anything else that might be a consideration. If there's a certain part of your market that you really want to uh, serve, there's a demand in a certain area. You have an underserved part of your market, then you've kind of already got a location in mind to a certain extent. And that's when a market feasibility study might be a better call for you. And if you're applying for a loan, and I would say that probably a good quarter of the market studies that I do are basically people who've come to me that said, we're looking for financing and our bank told us that we need to have a market study. So if you are planning to finance it all, the financial institution is going to want to know that you've done a market study and that your sales number is based upon something about your market. If it's a large grant, and I know that there are some grants out there that will actually help pay for a market study, but if you're looking for a large grant to actually help you build your particular store, they're also going to want to know that this money is not just being thrown at an idea, that this idea actually has some support behind it through an analysis done by experts. As you get up closer to your opening store, if you're negotiating a lease, or there's been a major change in the competitive environment, or I should say, a change in your market, like you have a competitor open, that's when you might consider getting an update to your market study. I don't want to say that if there's a lot of competitors, then you might be looking at another full market study. But if you have let's say you are looking at a natural foods co-op and you have a Whole Foods that opens in your market, what's that mean for your particular sales potential? And that's when you might be looking at an update for your market study. So with that in mind, I have no idea how long. Okay, I guess
We got a little bit of time left.
Okay, great. So does anybody have any questions?
please go ahead and throw those questions in the chat if you have them, and I can definitely kick us off. So I want to point out the preliminary market study, or they're not there. Now we're calling it preliminary market assessment, which I love. I'm going to use that term, assessment. As Patrick said, that is really about assessing in stage one if there's any viability to the vision that you're about to share to your community. That's the thing, is what we see a lot of startups saying, going, hey, let's think about starting a food co-op together. What maybe and find out what that might look like. People tend to go to their communities and go, let's build a full service grocery store with a deli and a classroom and put it on this corner. You want to know if there's any potential viability to and that vision for what the business plan of how the store will manifest. You want to build that with the owners towards something that's actually doable, right? And so that is one of those things. Yeah, Pat, go ahead and throw your question in the chat, please, if possible. And we'd love to see that. So I just want to make sure we're clarifying that. Now, we sometimes get the question, I'm throwing you on the spot a little. Some folks says, is there such a thing as being in too small of a rural community? Because rural, if we're talking USDA rural, come up to 40,000 people, right? And sometimes we're working with communities that are 500 people. And they're like, do these market studies really apply? Do you have comparative data for that? Like, is there such a thing as too small for a market study?
Um, I'll be honest and say we don't have a lot of examples of places that are quite that small. I would say that we have a few within our database, although some of them tend to be in areas. No, we have a couple actually. And so I don't know that too small is the right term to actually use it. We would probably recommend a much smaller store within that. So I don't think that there's too small a market to actually open your store, because we do have stores that are in very rural, very small markets. And what you want to know is you want to know what is the sales potential within this particular area to help you decide how large a store to open. So if you have only 500 people in your town, you're not going to want to open a 5,000 square foot store. You're going to want to open a much smaller store. And I've done, just over the last few years, I've done several studies that where we're talking much fewer than 10,000 people in the market area. And so part of this might actually be dictated by not just how many people are within your town, but how many people are in the trade area itself. And so if people are driving 50 miles to get to your town for buying some basic goods, then they would be considered part of your trade area as well. And so they would figure into the calculation as well.
So we have some really technical questions showing up in the chat, which I think some of them might be we are Patrick has agreed to stay post recording and talk a little bit more, and we can unmute. Some of these I might leave to that. So I'm going to, they're kind of technical questions about how you do your studies, and I want to talk more about, how the studies are used, and what they can do for startup food co-ops. So I will encourage some of those questions. If we have no other questions that are specific to how startups use these studies, then we can bring those up, but otherwise we'll do them right after the recording wraps up at the top of the hour. I do think one of the things that folks continually ask us is this was because becoming more and more common for startup food co-ops, where the question isn't where to put it. They've been given a building. So the question is, what can it do? How big should the store be? Like, can you take the question from the other direction with them in a market study and say, okay, this is the building, this is the location. Now, what kind of product mix, what size store? Can you take the question from the other direction like that with them as well?
Yes, absolutely. And that comes up quite a bit, right? And sometimes what we might recommend is, let's say they've been given a building and the building has 5,000 square feet of total space, right? So maybe 3,500 square feet of sales area. And the market could only support a store that's half that size. Then what we might initially. So keep in mind that you're starting off, when you start off your sales, you're starting off at a lower volume than the full sales potential. So maybe what you consider is you consider starting your store smaller, basically saving some of that extra area for an opportunity to sort of store more inventory so you can buy more things in bulk at discount. And then eventually expanding your store. So setting it up in such a way that you can expand it when you need it. One of the toughest questions that I think that comes up from time to time is what is your tolerance in terms of the overall dollars per square footage within your store, right? What do you need to be able to operate your store? And, for some people, that might be that first year sales needs to be about $700 per square feet, per square foot. In some cases, if you don't have a lot of rent and a lot of overhead, maybe you could sort of have a smaller dollar per square foot within that. Um, so we're providing you with the overall sales number so that you can make that informed decision. But if you come back to me and basically say, we can't open a smaller store because we're being given this building, then I can do the sales forecast and let you know what a store at that size is going to do. Because if you open up a 2,000 square foot store versus an 8,000 square foot store, the 8,000 square foot store is going to do more in sales than the 2,000 square foot store. The question is, can you afford to open that 8,000 square foot store? So we can provide you with those numbers regardless of what we might recommend as being the right size for your store.
That's something, I know we only have a couple more minutes here before we're going to wrap up, but I really want to stress about Patrick does that I think a lot of, when I first started using market studies as a general manager, I think a lot of startups miss is that you can come in and say, this exact site, this exact product makes, and you can, and he will project. My understanding is based on those things. And also, if you want to use their expertise to say, where would you put this store? What area would I get the highest sales volume? What product mix do you think would sell best in this area? You know, so there's this room between you can dictate what you want and get numbers, and you also can utilize the expertise. And so that leads me to Patrick, a question of like, kind of, I don't know if it's how to say, but what can they expect from the relationship with you, the pre-conversation, and after they get the report, the kind of post-conversation, and the role you can help them play in understanding the report?
Well, I usually will follow up with um, well, usually I'll ask you questions ahead of time, and so we can collect some preliminary data. So once you've sort of signed an agreement and sent in a retainer, I do require a retainer. Then I will ask you some questions specifically about your market and your intentions for the store. And if I'm doing field work, if we're talking a market feasibility study, I would hope to meet you while I'm in the field, just for a little bit, just to ask any questions that I might have within that. And then once I'm done with the study, and once I provide you with the overall study, then absolutely I'm happy to follow up with some sort of presentation. Kind of leave that up to you whether or not you would like me to present to your group or not, maybe through a Zoom meeting. But I'm always happy to follow up. I'm always happy to answer questions. I've had people ask if I could make clarifications. And absolutely, I'm happy to do that as well. If there are modifications to the study, then maybe I'll charge a nominal fee to do that, but it's all included. The one thing I do want to mention is I try, and I hope this doesn't come across as being off-puttish at all, but when I'm in the market, I don't want to be too tainted by your excitement about the store. You're excited about the store. I get it. I am too, but I need to be very level-headed and be objective when I'm actually looking at your particular market. Because again, my objective is to give you the most accurate numbers possible. And I try to remove myself from bias about your store. Sometimes we'll get real estate developers who will basically be so marketing in their effort to basically get the store open that I'll just kind of have to sort of remove myself from receiving too much bias because the important thing is that accuracy, trying to give you the most accurate numbers possible.
That is so helpful to hear. I think sometimes people do take it personal. It's like, let's take you to dinner and sell you on our project. And it's like, I kind of need that impartiality. There are great questions coming up the chat now, and it's time for us to wrap up. So I am going to wrap us up, but I want to, there's a couple of really good questions I want to follow up on here. So if you guys have a few minutes to stay, I wish we could include them. I'm going to go ahead and do, though, our little quick wrap up before we do that. So first, I just want to absolutely thank Patrick for being here, for making this happen, um, and that we are. Okay. So we want to thank Patrick for making this happen today. We're so grateful he came out and did this to share his wisdom with everybody. There is a 2 minute survey that just showed up in your email box if you're here. Please take it. It is literally 2 minutes long at most, and it's a great way to thank us and Patrick for putting on the session because that feedback is anonymous. We give it to Patrick. He gets to know about how effective this was for you, and we get to let our sponsors know how effective the series was for you so we can continue to make the series free. So we really appreciate it. We have coming up today one more session today. Fourth Wave Black Cooperativism, Black Joy Rising. I am so excited that Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nebhart has agreed to come here and be with us. If you don't know who she is, just an amazing cutting edge thinker and researcher on cooperativism. You don't want to miss it. And then we have 3 more sessions tomorrow before we wrap this whole thing up, and we hope to see you there for some of those. And again, real quick, we had a record number of sponsors this year for FCI Live 2025 who believe in the startup food co-op movement and make series like this possible. Thank so much to them.